We're going to talk about threat modeling and risk assessments now. You should now have an understanding of vulnerabilities, threats, adversaries, consequences, and the resulting risk, as well as how security is the process, actions, and technologies that protect your assets, privacy, and anonymity. We will now dig a little deeper into how to apply some of what we have learned. First, very important point, you cannot ever have 100% security, just like you can never have zero risk. Therefore, you can never completely protect your assets or maintain perfect privacy or have total anonymity. If you have ever seen someone advertising 100% security, run a mile. They have no clue about what they're talking about. Unless you stop engaging in an activity, there will always be risk. Engaging in life has a risk. Going on the internet has a risk. We take these risks for the great opportunities and benefits that the internet brings. In order to exploit the opportunity of using the internet, we have to accept a level of risk. And you need to personally decide what is your tolerance for risk based on your circumstances. The lower tolerance for risk you have, i.e. if the consequences of loss of security, privacy, or anonymity is high, then the more security controls you need. The more advanced and often restrictive to usability security controls you will want. The higher tolerance for risk you have, i.e. the consequences might be low, the less security controls you will need. So security is a balance. It's a balance between usability and security, between risk and opportunity. And security often gets in the way of ease of use, which is why we must choose security controls that are fit for purpose and are in line with our appetite for risk. This course in the section on Know Yourself and Know Your Enemy will provide you with background information on the threats and vulnerabilities that you might face on the internet so you can make an informed choice on your needs for security, privacy, and anonymity and tolerance for risk. So wait until we go through those sections, and then you will start to understand more the threats and adversaries that are out there and things that you may never have known about before. Another very important point now, you should take a risk-based approach to your security. We know we can't have 100% security, so you need to take a risk-based approach to applying the right level of security to mitigate the risk, without it being overburdensome to the point where the system is unusable. But only you can choose how big and burdensome your security needs to be to protect your assets. In order to take a risk-based approach to security, you should do basic threat modeling and risk assessments when selecting your security controls. And I'll walk you through an example of doing that now. So risk equals vulnerabilities times threats times consequences. So let's go through an assessment process now. First, we start with our assets. You should now have a list or a rough list or an idea of your assets based on the earlier videos. You should have a rough concept of the things you care about and want to protect. Vulnerabilities, threats, and adversaries. You may have some understanding of what your threats are and your adversaries are, which might be one of the reasons why you're choosing to do the course. Or you may have no clear idea at all or be somewhere in the middle. In the section on Know Your Enemy, we cover many of the vulnerabilities, threats, and adversaries. When you go through that section, determine which apply to you in order to determine your risk. Determine the consequences of assets being compromised, of threats being realized. When it comes to your assets, consider if they are lost or stolen, destroyed or encrypted so you can't use them, placed on the internet, put in the hands of your adversaries, criminals, hackers, government, law enforcement agencies. How could it impact your reputation, your privacy, your anonymity? What would be the impact of loss of privacy and anonymity? What is your adversary likely to do? Concentrate on the consequences if the threats and adversaries are less tangible to discover. And that's a key point there. Concentrate on consequences in order to determine the risk and the security controls you need to use if your understanding and concept of the threats and adversaries are less tangible, which is actually often the case. you consider the consequences, the impact more. Once you have an understanding of your assets, their threats, vulnerabilities, adversaries, the security controls that are available to you, as you may not know what all the security controls are available to you or even how to configure them, which is part of what the course is, and you understand the consequences of threats being realized, you will be able to determine a general level of risk that you feel you are at. You might have identified particular risky behaviors that you perform, threats, adversaries, vulnerabilities that need the strongest security controls and most attention. Let me give you an example of something you may have concluded once you've gone through enough of the course to be able to start doing threat modeling and risk assessments. Maybe you're concerned about the threat of your laptop being stolen. The adversary would be a thief. The vulnerability is the data on the laptop being in clear text, and the consequences are reputational damage and maybe identity theft. Based on your tolerance for risk, you would select security controls that mitigate the risk, and you should apply security controls to the greatest risks first. The whole course is a series of lessons on security controls, how to apply them, why to apply them, their strengths and weaknesses, and so on. As you go through the course, select, implement, assess, monitor those security controls that we go through. When it comes to select security controls that best mitigate the risks. For example, of the stolen laptop that we were just talking about, you could select whole disk encryption using LUKS, an encrypted boot sector, and pre-boot authentication as some of your security controls that mitigate that threat. Then implement those controls. You install LUKS whole disk encryption and configure it. Then assess the controls you have selected for their effectiveness. Check that the whole disk encryption is working and the data is actually encrypted. Then monitor the effectiveness of the security controls. Check for security updates, for example, and vulnerabilities in LUKS, and so on. If a weakness is discovered, you go back to the select stage again. So that's threat modeling and risk assessments. Once you've gone through a percentage of this course, you should start to feel more confident in assessing the threats and adversaries, understanding where your vulnerabilities might be, and then start to understand where you apply the security controls to protect the things that you care about, privacy or anonymity or your files or email. So I hope that helps in making sure you select the correct security controls. Gives you the maximum benefit to protect your assets.